So this is a process. Over time, masters gain an intuitive feel for the whole of their field. It's excitement and joy that awaits you if you're patient. Let's just go over a quick sprint review here. Let's take a look at what we have. Go to the board. See, can you guys see the sprint board here?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sharing this tab now. So now we have the sprint board here, and we can see that all these are crossed off. So week 5 is now complete. If you want to get a head start on week 6, we can go ahead and start that sprint. I'm going to close out this sprint here for week 5. If you want to get a head start, now's a chance to get a head start and go through week 6. I think that that's a valuable thing if you have the time. If you can keep progressing at your rate, you can keep your momentum up. Don't lose that momentum. Just keep going and keep on attacking problems at the speed that you can. All right. So we'll just go back through week 5, right? There's 2 approaches to teaching yourself the material, right? You can just practice a lot and get really good at what you do, or you can, bookmark documentation, save examples, and work through those examples and provide those for other people as well. My approach is practice, 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 practice. Solve lots of problems, read something, and then apply it. Practice, right? Every day, go through, do 30 minutes of review of just words related to the topic that you're learning. Familiarize yourself with the language. Immerse yourself in what you're doing, right? Eat, breathe, and sleep and code. And then at the end of these 12 weeks, when you go into your job, easiest thing to do is to hold back what you're doing, ask more questions than you ask, more than you speak, so listen more than you talk, and apply what you know, right? Refrain from having the temptation to try and overstep senior people in that area, and kind of let your training show what you know how to do. So back to JavaScript debugging, right? I'm guilty of using console.log for most of my debugging, and there are better ways to do it. Right? We looked at how we can use the Chrome debugger. You can set breakpoints in the developer tools, and we can use those breakpoints to find the point in the application where we want to stop and step over those advances in the application to step forward. We can resume to stop the debugging and reset it. And the watch tab is where you can type in a variable name to track their values as the application executes. And we can remove those watch variables after we're done. And the call stack can be used to see which functions have been called and the order in which they're called. We saw an example of using a timeout to test the timing between 2 different functions. And we can use the file system and the sources tab to open our working directory so that we can edit code in the browser. This can be useful both for development and debugging. And we can allow Chrome to access the file system. You want to make sure that you remove them when you're done. And they're persistent throughout browser sessions, right? So there's a Chrome Developer Tools extension, and you can do everything that we've done here inside VS Code, but if you want to just run it in Chrome, we saw how we can do that. Preferably just use Chrome. So, debugging. Why do I care? Debugging tools help developers find and fix errors in a program before releasing it to the public. What do you need? VS Code, a browser, and Chrome Developer Tools. How do you do it? Create a JavaScript file and follow the instructions on the next slide. Write a loop that makes 7 calls to console.log to output the following code. All right, so Everyone can see the screen here. We'll go into how do you do it, right? And this is how you do it. Essentially, you have a pound sign, right? And then this pound sign is incremented every time with a variable. That's how this works, right? Every time that we execute a loop, a new symbol is created. Cool. So what if you want to go through your code line by line? Well, you can set a breakpoint, and that breakpoint will step over the code. Just to rehash on the document object model, right? HTML collections are not arrays, they are array-like. HTML collections are the result of methods like .getElements by class name or .getElements by tag name. You can have two items that you can have two methods that have .item, right? And that takes an index, which is a named item, which we don't really use in this one. And node lists are not arrays; they are array-like. So array lists are the result of a method .querySelectorAll. They have some methods that belong to arrays. However, not every array method will work on node lists. Some of the available ones to node lists are .forEach, .item, .entries, .keys, .values. A node list contains all nodes, including comments and text nodes. To make this easier, my recommendation is to use the array from. The array from node list. So we have the array from method, right? And that'll allow you to convert them into arrays if you want to use any array methods. Okay, so JavaScript, why do I care? JavaScript can be used to read, write, and update an HTML document. What do you need? VS Code, W3 Schools, and Mozilla developer documentation. How do I do it? Create a JavaScript file and follow the instructions in the next slide. Write a line of code that can select an element on the page and change the text. So we'll go over the results of this. How do you do it? Here's the example, right? We have our title here, and then we have our JavaScript. So we're fetching the item by its ID, and then we're changing the inner HTML with a new title. What if, what about? What if I want to insert an additional HTML element into the document that I'm altering, right? We just saw, so you can use the inner HTML method to update the text. So, the JavaScript document object model. We have our window, then we have our document. From that document, we have forms, anchor tags, links. Those forms are linked to text areas. That's another element. Checkbox elements, radio elements, selectors, buttons. All those things are accessible through the form. So when we think about this, we have the document at the base of the hierarchical structure. From that, we have all these elements that can be selected, and from specific elements, such as a form, there are other elements that are accessible from that. All right. Just to rehash here of the document object model. So document.all gets the entire document structure. It has been deprecated, and we have the document.head, which gets the entire head of the document. It's just a type of object, not an array. It's an HTML collection or node list. A document.body gets the entire body of the document. It's just a type of object, not an array. It's an HTML collection or node list. So we don't really recommend using the document.body or document.head. However, if you need to get children, you can access these objects and then access the children off of them, which you can reassign to an array with an array.from method. Basically, anything you can use a query selector and CSS can go in a .query selector or query selector all. Now we'll touch on the child nodes. So child nodes return a node list. Children returns an HTML collection. You can get the .children or .child nodes of an HTML collection or node list or an array. For example, using a UL, an unordered list, you can access the LIs inside of it. .firstChild gets the first child element. If a comment or just a text is available, it will grab that first element. .firstChild works the same as first child element, except .firstChild ignores text nodes and comment nodes. .lastChild does the opposite of .firstChild. .lastElementChild does the opposite of .firstElementChild. And .childElementCount will count only the elements belonging to the array or node list or HTML collection. You can examine the concept of a parent node. So the first bullet here returns an entire parent node, for example, the body element. This doesn't work for element nodes. It needs to be an array, an HTML collection, or node list. If the parent node is a comment or text node, it will return that. You can return a parent element. That does not return a text node or a comment node if it is the parent that searches for the nearest parent element. .next sibling returns the next sibling node, not a child. .next element sibling, you can probably guess, ignores comment and text nodes. And .previous sibling and previous element sibling probably doesn't really need any explanation. Those are just the previous siblings. So we can use document.createElement to create new elements. Make sure that you store this element in a new variable and append it later. Make sure you pass the type of element you want to create as a string. When we use the .className, you set a class on our new element. You can set multiple classes by including spaces. We can use a .id to set an ID. We can use the .appendChild to add our new element. This will always be added as a child of the parent specified. It will be the first item if there are no children. It will be the last item if there are children inside of the element. We can use .createTextNode to create a text node. We can create text nodes and append them inside of our new element and then append them onto an element in the HTML document. We can replace children with the replaceChild method and make sure that when you state the parent node .replaceChild, not document.replaceChild. We can remove children with the remove method. The thing is, you want to make sure that you state the node to be removed .remove, not document.remove. Right? The node, you want to use the node name, not document.remove. Then we have .ClassList. So it is very useful, in my opinion. Right? The syntax is element.classlist.add/remove/toggle. Toggle can leave a class attribute set to nothing. It's not super important, but just in case you see that, it's normal. So we can use the .textContent to change the content of our elements. We can use the .innerHTML to also change the content of our elements. We can also write HTML. Basically, we can nest HTML inside of our current element. So we can look at an example of text content. Here we have an example. Let text equal element.textContent. We can go ahead and click try it, right? The content of the button is try it. This is the way that we get the text content. And we can let the property here on demo. So this demo paragraph is going to be set to the inner HTML of the text, which comes out to be try it, right? So we're getting the text content and then we're using it to change the inner HTML. In this case, we have the text content in the inner HTML. So we're fetching the text content, and then we're updating the HTML here. This is the example. Okay, so .text content versus .inner HTML. If you want tags to be interpreted as literal text, .text content can be useful for this. If you want to insert additional HTML, .inner HTML is a must. If just inserting text, use .text content, even though .inner HTML will work. .text content is more performant as it does not have to parse our string into HTML. .outer HTML affects not only the inner HTML, it affects the content between the tags, right? So you can modify an H1 or an H3. .value can be used to input values out of input boxes or anything that carries the value attribute. .style can be used to modify styles of HTML elements. We can use IDs or classes in inner HTML to walk the DOM. Now we'll go into JavaScript events. So, essentially you must be able to specify the event as a string. The event object can be aliased as anything, though it must be the first parameter passed, right? We can use the e or event method here, and we can use e.preventDefault to prevent the default event behavior. We can prevent a form from being submitted. We can prevent a checkbox from being checked. Not a really good list of default behaviors. If someone finds one, please share. We can pass in a named function that we defined somewhere else. This is easier to see than to explain. I prefer to use the anonymous function as a way to just do this. It's easier. E.target can be used to grab hold of which element the event was fired off. This may be useful if you have an listener on an element, but oftentimes you may have many and you may need to apply different behaviors depending on which was selected. Click is a single click, double click is two sequential clicks, mouse down is a pressed element. So, JavaScript events. Why do I care? JavaScript gives us a way to listen and react to things that happen on HTML elements. What do you need? VS Code, W3 Schools, Mozilla Developer. How do I do it? Create a JavaScript file and follow the instructions on the next slide. Take the example shown above and update it to show the time in years. So let's continue going through this. You're asked to get the date in years based on the example shown before. Here's the solution. We can use the date object .getYear. This will return the year. So we're going off of this method .getYear to return the year. So what if, what about? What if I want to change an element when the user presses a keyboard key? In that case, we can use the onKeyPress method. So JavaScript events continue. Mouse up is a pointing device. Press. It's when you press on a pointing device. So mouse up on a pointing device is a button released over an element. Mouse enter is a pointing device which is moved onto an element. Mouse leave is when a pointing device is moved off of the element. Mouse over is a pointing device moved on to the element that has a listener attached or onto one of its children. Mouse out is a pointing device which is moved off of the element and has the listener attached or out of its children. Right? Mouse over and mouse out are better most of the time. And then we have mouse move. Mouse move is when something actually moves over an element. So Clearing inputs. We can do this by setting the value back to an empty string. Submitting an event is when something is fired at any time a form submission is made, right? A submission event is when we click that submit button. Key down is for any key being pressed, can also fire continuously. A key press is any except shift, function, or caps lock. And a key press fired is when it's fired continuously. So a key press is any key except shift, function, caps lock, or something like that that's fired. A key up, right? A key up is any event where a key is released. We have some key up code, so you can use an arrow up, an arrow down, an arrow right, an arrow left, enter. These are different keys that you could typically use for monitoring what someone's doing in the application. The focus element is an element that has received focus. The blur element is an element that has lost focus. Cut is when you use Control X. So pause here and we'll take a break. All right, so yep, now we're back from break here. So keep working through JavaScript events. We want to understand pasting, input, and changing events. So paste is when you either copy, you can right click and click paste, or you can press Control V. It's also, when input is introduced into a form, you can paste something, we can detect that. The change is when some form control has been changed. For example, select drop down, where something like that has happened, right? Talk about then bubbling. So bubbling is when an event happens on an element. It first runs the handlers on it, and then on its parent, then all the way up to the ancestors. And not all events bubble. If there's no event listener on the parent classes, the event still bubbles, but no actions are taken. If we don't want our event to bubble, we can stop it with the stop propagation method. Delegation is basically the opposite of bubbling, where we put an event listener on the parent and have it go down into the children. This is basically done by putting the listener on some parent, even as high as the entire body, and then using e.target to delegate which ones do specific functions. This can be useful when we use JavaScript to dynamically insert additional HTML. It's kind of a confusing topic, so here's my 2 cents. Event delegation can be useful when there's cleaner syntax as opposed to a loop that assigns multiple event listeners. And bubbling is kind of a pain. You don't really know what you have until you actually start using it. So, use it with caution. So, why do I care? Understanding bubbling and delegation is important because you have to be aware of how event handlers travel through elements and how to control that. What do you need? VS Code, W3 Schools, and Mozilla Developer Tools. How do you do it? Create a JavaScript file and follow the instructions in the next slide. What is the output from the code shown on the screen? All right. So, let's go back. Okay, yep, that's right. So the output is, we'll take a second here. All right. So you've tried this now, right? Now the output is true. Yeah, that's the correct answer here, right? The click button is used here to check the value, and when we do that, it returns true. So what if I want to change an element when the user presses a keyboard key? We saw you can use the onKeyPress method. So now we'll go through regular expressions. Regular expressions are a tool we can use to describe a pattern to a computer. This is conceptually very hard for computers to understand, and regular expressions can be very powerful. Regular expressions aren't a data type as far as I'm aware, but they are special and can sort out types of syntax and be treated as such. We can define a regular expression between 2 forward slashes. Regular expressions are a pretty deep rabbit hole that not many people have actually found the bottom of, and you could probably spend an entire week just going through that. Regular expressions exist in pretty much every, if not every, programming language. First, we get into how to define patterns. So let's look at some JavaScript patterns and we can see how to run them. Let's look at the pattern exec string. So here we have an example of the exec string, and we're looking for the term E. This returns an array. The first index is the match string. The second index is the position in that string. And the third is the input string.
Your screen's not showing.
The first index is the match string, and the second index is the position in that string, and then the third is the input string. So we can go ahead and run this example. Right, and here we're extracting the result, and we're just getting that first part here, right? So the first index is the match string. We have pattern test string. So this returns a Boolean if there's a match. String.match pattern returns all matches in an array if a global flag is denoted. String.search pattern returns the index number of the first matched regular expression. Returns -1 if no matches are found. String.replace takes a pattern in a new string. The same method, string, that we all know about and we all love. This can take an empty character and we can replace things. So it's a way for deleting characters, right? Regex Previewer is a nice extension for building regular expressions. You can look at this regex lab here. So regex lib is one of the internet's most powerful regular expression tools. This is a way for you to get familiar with regular expressions. We have regex 101. This tool will allow you to enter a regular expression here. So you can do E and then name, and we want to get we want to start with, we'll just match an E. We can do A through Z in here. So no match. Yeah, one of my favorites is just use a wildcard. So insert your regular expression here. Let's see, what can we do? Let's try. Yeah, so this is using a bunch of different expressions here. It uses multi-line. So we have our test string here. Let's yeah, so we have one match, and this is showing that we have a match here. If we hit this, you can see that we have an output that shows what this actually matches. Go ahead and put in the wildcard. Okay, doesn't recognize that one. One match for name, NA. There's one match in 2 steps. So just go over here and we can see where this matches the indices. Then we have regexer. So this can be used to capture a set of strings. This gives you an example of how to start using the regex string here. Then we have regex1, another great resource. So regular expressions are an extremely useful tool for extracting information from text such as code, log files, spreadsheets, or even documents. This has a set of exercises where we can match these characters. So you want to match A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I type my pattern A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Right? And if you want to match all of these, we can put in A through Z. Go on to the next one. That's a taste of regular expressions. So, flags we can pass in regular expressions: I, G, meta characters, caret, $, dot, wildcard, question mark, slash, right? So the reason I teach regular expressions this way is that you can get to know them without learning them. You don't need to know how to use JavaScript regex methods, right? You can get by for a while without knowing regex, and you can just use the tools. So understanding how to use those tools is useful. Meta characters go between the slashes to define the pattern, and you can combine those meta characters all you like. You can use the caret and the $. The caret is used to specify where the string must begin, and the $sign is used to specify where it must end. The period is used to represent any character. The wildcard is used to represent 0 or any characters that precede the symbol. Plus is used to represent 1 or more of any character that is preceded by the symbol. And a question mark is used to represent a character that is optional to the regex, and the backslash is an escape character. So, all right, we can specify a range of characters that are available in one position with character sets. We can use those brackets to get A through Z, any one character capital between A and Z, and then we can use lowercase a through Z, and we can use 0 through 9 as digits. We can fetch everything using A through Z and lowercase a through Z in 0 through 9. And then we can get lowercase letters using something like A, C. The caret means anything excluding specific values inside of a character set. It's different inside of a character set than when it's out. You cannot mix exclusion with inclusion in a character set. Talk about quantifiers. We can use quantifiers to specify how much of something we want. You can specify just a minimum number, or you can specify a min and max. You can specify a minimum any greater than any amount min. We can also use parentheses to group things together. So it follows PEMDAS, right? Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. A word character set is used to represent sets of characters. We can think of the character sets for us to use. So we have \W, that's a word character, alphanumeric, and then we have \W, that's a non-word or alphanumeric character. Then we have \D, which is any digit. \D is any non-digit. \S matches white space characters. \S matches any non-white space characters. \B is a word boundary. If anything follows the boundary, it is not a match. So, regular expressions. Why do I care? Regular expressions are used for pattern matching and validation. What do I need? VS Code, W3 Schools, and Mozilla Developer Documentation. Update the code on the screen to search for F. Nice. So now we'll look at the answer. So this is the code that shows how to change the regex to find the correct character. And as we saw, a simple update will allow us to extract the characters F. When we click the button, well, we actually see this when we just run the code. Yeah, so just to explain this, what you see here is in the regex, we're actually getting the character F. When you run this, you'll find that it extracts character F. So what about? What if you want to create your own regular expression pattern? It starts by Googling it and going to the resources that we just saw, using regex 101 or regex tester. All right, now we'll cover HTML validation. So HTML validation is a way for us to take a form, an input, and apply some sort of logic to it. We can use required, min length, and max length to require that a certain length is in the input and that it is required for submission. You can also specify the type of input that is required, such as an email or a password. We could even use a pattern. This pattern is a way for us to set a certain criteria on the character string entered into the input. We also have CSS pseudo-selectors that allow us to validate. We can disable, we could set the form to be disabled, we could set the input to be disabled, and we have invalid event, valid CSS, required CSS. So when present, it specifies an input field and must be filled out before submitted. Validation. Why do I care? Some kinds of validation can be done using HTML and CSS. What do I need? VS Code, W3 Schools, Mozilla Developer. How do I do it? Let's take this code on the screen here, and we'll try and it's not this code. Yeah, so just to rehash, right? Why do I care, right? We want to be able to do validation through HTML and CSS. We need VS Code, W3 Schools, Mozilla Developer, and we want to take this example and update the code on the screen to require a code input consisting of just 3 digits. Give that a shot. Okay, cool. So the solution to this problem, we just have to update the code here to search for 3 letters, or 3 digits here. Sorry. So the way that we did this is we add a regex pattern where we find the 3 digits for the code, and then we add that as the validation string, which validates the string. Cool.
I have a question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
All right, so let's go through array methods. So sort allows us to sort our arrays in a specified order. If no parameters are specified, everything is converted to a string and ordered from 0 to 1, A through Z, or lowercase a through Z. This will think that 101 is less than 2 because it sees 2 greater than 1. The first parameter is the index, and the second parameter is the second index. If you return a negative number, it will place the first index in the lower index of the 2. If you return a 0, the first and second will remain unchanged. If you return a positive number, it will place the second index in the lower index value of the 2. All right. Find returns the first match that meets the specified criteria. The array.find function will take an argument, right, and it will actually go through and it will find the element in an array. You can use a conditional to compare that so that you can actually find the element. Here we have an example. So We have our const array, 5, 12, 8, 130, 44. Let's go ahead and run find. And it comes back with 12. I'm looking for,
I can't see it.
in this example, we have array 1, which contains 5, 12, 8, 130, and 44. And when we have an element that's greater than 10, it'll return that. Right, so in this case, the first one we find is 12. Map is a method we can use to modify each element of an array. For example, multiple every element by 2. You can look at an example here. We have 1, 4, 9, 16, and then we have a value x times 2. If we run this, here's our input array, here's our output array. Map allows us to apply this operation to all the values within that array.
Nothing is shown.
Here we have the array, 1, 2, 4, 9, 16. We can apply map to that. When we apply map, we get 2, 8, 18, 32. It's a way for us to apply the map operation to this array. Okay. We also have reduce. Reduce takes in 2 parameters. So in this case, we have array reduce, and it takes the previous value and the current value, and it takes the previous value and adds the initial value. And then we console.log the sum with the initial value. So go ahead and run this, get back 10. So the expected output is 10. You see we have this array of 1, 2, 3, 4. So when we add these together, we get back 10.
Is reduce always just an addition? It just sums it all up, each argument or of the well, actually, yeah, each index value of the array.
We can apply any operation we want here. We can apply multiplication, division. We can call a function and pass in the previous value and the current value. It's a way for us to reduce an entire array.
Awesome, thank you.
Mm-hmm. The filter method can be used to remove any elements that don't fit a certain criteria. So let's look at JavaScript timing. We have set timeout, which takes in a function and then a time in milliseconds. So this sets a timeout, which will cause a method to time out after a certain duration of time. And then we have set interval, allows us to set an interval for calling the function. And then we can add a method called clear timeout, which will remove any timeouts on that function. And clear interval will remove any intervals associated with that function. Why do I care? JavaScript timing is an important concept. You can use a timing event to do many things, such as displaying an alert box a few seconds after a button was clicked. What do you need? VS Code, W3 Schools, and Mozilla Developer documentation. How do I do it? Update the code shown above to delay 5 seconds and show an alert. Alright, so now we'll go through this, right? How do I do it? This is just the case where we change it to 5,000 seconds and we can display that alert. Okay, pretty straightforward. So what about? How can JavaScript timing events improve my application? Well, it provides asynchronous behavior. We can have things happen at different time intervals and expose different experiences. Now we'll talk about JSON. So JSON is JavaScript object notation. It's a way to represent data. We can use a key-value pair to represent a key and a value. These could be a name, a transaction ID with a value related to a product. We can use the methods json.parse to process the JSON response that we get, and And we can use JSON.stringify to stringify our data and send it to a different location on the internet. So, JSON. Why do I care? JSON makes it possible to store JavaScript objects as text. What do I need? VS Code, W3 Schools, and Mozilla Developer Documentation. How do I do it? Change the code above to display John Doe instead of Anna Smith. Nice. This is the code that displays Anna Smith. A simple modification, and we have working code that actually shows us how to extract a property, Anna Smith. What if, what about? What are some use cases for using JSON with JavaScript? Sending an object via an API, an application programming interface. So, let's talk about JavaScript, local, and session storage. Local storage are data sets we can store on a client's computer. Session storage only exists for as long as the browser is open. Local storage belongs to a window object. DevTools is the place that you go to access this, and then you click on Application, and then you click on Local Storage. So, document.cookie is another thing that we could use. It creates a new cookie each time you use it. You can have multiple values in a cookie, separated with a colon. The default expiration is by a session. You can set an expiration with an expires equals to a value in UTC time. You can specify a file that the cookie belongs to with a path equals file path. However, it's usually default is the current page. And then we can read with just document.cookie, but we'll combine all into one. And you can delete cookies by setting them to a time that has already passed. So here's an example of local storage. The local storage read-only property
Can't see the screen.
The local storage read-only property of the window interface allows you to access a storage object for the document's origin. The stored data is saved across browser sessions. Local storage is similar to session storage, except that while local storage data has no expiration time, session storage data gets cleared when the page session ends. That is, when the page is closed. Local storage data for a document is loaded into a private browsing or incognito session. When that is loaded into one of those sessions, it is cleared. Right? So, local storage. Why do I care? Understanding the difference between local and session storage is very important. Local storage is retained indefinitely. Session storage is lost once the session is ended. What do I need? VS Code and Mozilla Developer Tools. How do I do it? Add an item to local storage, first name with John. All right. This is a working example. So in this case, we have our local storage, and we're setting the last name here to Smith and our first name to John. Right. So what if, what about? When should I use local storage, and when should I use session storage? The main features of local storage are shared between all tabs from the same origin. The data does not expire. It means after the data remains after the browser has been restarted or even OS reboot. The session storage object is used much less often than local storage. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty interesting. So you said that it kind of like made you feel like you're actually being tested in that case?
Yeah, yeah, you got to pull it from just the theory to the actual application.
Yeah. So you actually had to pull the knowledge out of theory. So who feels confident in their JavaScript skills now?
A lot more than I was feeling.
Okay. All right. Nice. All right. So how's everything going with the homework so far?
Well, a lot of the stuff that you covered today helped me understand something I was stuck on from last week's homework. So it's good.
What was the specific thing that you were stuck on?
It was homework 2. It was to change a class ID, or to add it actually, for these stop and go. And I used Stack Overflow to ask a question. And I think I started like a little argument between people on the comment boards.
Okay. Yep. What did you notice about the majority of users on Stack Overflow?
A lot of ego.
Yeah, that's the intent of encouraging you guys to use Stack Overflow. When you go into a situation with someone who has more experience, the number one thing, and we even saw when Pratik came, the number one problem was a lot of software developers, number one, fail to ask good questions. Number two, they fail to listen. If you can listen and you can be lavish with your praise, that will take you to the pinnacles of success in software development, right? This is where it comes back to some tips that we had from Clark, right? Kindness goes a long way. The way that you approach that problem is you went to Stack Overflow and you asked a question, right? That prompted your processing of the material, and then coming back over time, it works. Like, you just came into class and now you got it, right? So we get so caught up in the anxiety of, I don't know how to do this. Oh, it seems impossible. It'll all fizzle out. It'll all fizzle out with time. It's just a matter of putting something out there. The guy who created Stack Overflow, his motto was, just do it, right? So if you have an idea, the best thing you can do is actually just go to Stack Overflow and just post the question, right? Someone will come back and they'll actually answer it. And if they don't answer it, and you come back and you answer it, you've just created something entirely new. Yeah.
Good to know. So I shouldn't delete the ones that people don't answer. Try to figure it out.
Yeah, you leave them out there and you come back to them. You keep circling back and you keep trying to answer it. Yeah. All right, any other feedback from anyone?
Yeah, like what you said earlier made sense. It's like just repetition. I mean, like I was away for last week, and I felt like coming back, I felt like everything I learned was like starting to slip away. So definitely, doing these things helps.
Okay. All right. Yeah, so that's it for week 5, and everyone has their grades in, right? We can use this time to kind of catch up on things, and this will be just a time to go back through what you're working on and just rehash some of those problems that you're working on for the time being. Yeah, that's where we'll end tonight. So it's a time to actually just catch up.